Hello, I'm Albert Fried Cassorla. I'm an enthusiast of philosophy, not a professor of any kind, although I do teach poetry. But I'm here to lead a discussion later this evening on Aristotle on adversity and how to deal with it. And I have a brief presentation, should be less than 10 minutes, and I will begin now. So Aristotle is not famous for having views on adversity. And in fact, his views are more about overall happiness or human flourishing as expressed in the Nicomachean Ethics. So I'm going to run through some of his main points that he makes, and something I will do that's different from, a little bit different from other videos about Aristotle's ethics that are on YouTube, for example, is that I think I will highlight techniques or practical uses of the philosophy, which I don't agree with entirely, and you'll find out parts that I do agree with and do not, but why I think he is definitely still worth studying and learning from. I hope it'll be a useful resource. So in this talk, much of the introductory material will be familiar to anyone who has studied philosophy or Aristotle, but hang in there. The unique dimension that I will offer is how to make Aristotle's views on happiness and virtue part of everyday life, and how those views can help us overcome adversity, both small adversity and large, such as the COVID, or small stubbing your toe and being in pain, etc. An excellent book that I've enjoyed reading, which has been helpful on this subject, is Aristotle's Way by Edith Hall, which I recommend. I will have a PowerPoint that I'll put on the internet listed below this YouTube. So let's get started. We really haven't done yet. Okay. So Aristotle was the son of a master physician, which is important because he was primed for a life of science. So he wasn't caught up in Orphic mysteries such as perhaps Plato was. He was third in line of major Greek philosophers preceded by Socrates and Plato. His father was a court physician to Philip II, which was a good thing in terms of getting him in a position of power and therefore being able to marshal resources to do his important work. However, it set him up for problems later. Aristotle was tutor to Alexander the Great, which may or may not be a great thing. We're not sure how much Alexander absorbed from Aristotle's teaching. I do have one great anecdote that I think you'll enjoy hearing about. He wrote extensively on logic, ethics, physics, biology, metaphysics. So he was one of the most prolific and far-ranging thinkers that ever lived. As I mentioned, he offers views on how to develop the flourishing life and lead a happy life. However, his ethics, as I construe ethics, which includes politics, are extremely flawed. He is undemocratic, prideful, and worse. But we should give him credit for work that is incredibly encyclopedic and pioneering in many ways, including anticipating DNA. And he was well funded by Alexander in his research, and he had maybe as many as 1,000 people helping him gather specimens and begin the great work of starting biology. One of the great thinkers of all time, at least for 2,000 years. He wrote the Eudemian Ethics as well as the Nicomachean Ethics. He was not a perfect man. How do we regard this? Well, for one thing, compare him with Thomas Jefferson, even though he lived 1,700 years later. For Jefferson, if we admire his theories about equality, all men are created equal, founder of democracy, albeit in a flawed sense, we give him credit for that. Likewise, we give Aristotle credit for his original and helpful thinking, even though we fault him for his less savory aspects. He was a toady to two monarchs, um, an advocate of slavery, a male chauvinist. In fact, I took a course in feminism and ancient philosophy in which his writings were featured justly as an example of misogynistic philosophy. Why study him? Because there's much that is good and helpful, as I hope we'll see. So he believed that the main goal, for which there is no further or more a goal beyond, in other words, it's not an intermediary goal, is eudaimonia, human flourishing. So what that means is a bit complicated, but it mainly means living a totally fulfilled life using one's reason, which is the highest human faculty. And this is very relevant today, for reason and eudaimonia will help us beat back adversity. Other goals, such as pleasure, are intermediate on the way to eudaimonia. Deliberation helps us make the right choices. He spends a lot of time on that. Solon, lawgiver of ancient Athens, said that the only happy person is, only person whose happiness we can measure is a dead person. Aristotle said, no, no, no. You can measure it while you're alive and see how eudaimonic you are. So ethics are the key, by which he meant intellectual and moral values and making virtuous choices. Moderation is needed to steer between excessive qualities. And I think that is the key, but explaining how and learning how to view moderation is important. And one example I think of is any desirable trait that you have in yourself or in others can be addressed with finding the golden mean. If you made a mistake, for example, what were you excessive in or deficient in? A very focused examination of your own behavior and thinking will help you realize where you went wrong in minor lapses and in major lapses. Likewise, public figures, and I won't mention any, can be subject to the same questions of how are they excessive in their emotions or decision making. He recommends the golden mean, or what some people call the Goldilocks approach, not too hot, not too cold, not too anything. This works very well, with an exception of Michelangelo. I mean, one example is if you have only moderation, you'll never achieve great art, I think, because you'll never have that peak of inspiration. You'll always be saying, no, too much inspiration, too much whatever. But in general, it's valid. He believes in the value of friendship, and once almost lost his life defending his friend Callisthenes, who objected to Alexander's demanding that people worship him as a god. So he believed democracy was the worst form of government, but he did believe in community, and that he opened his lectures to the general public, not all the lectures, but the public lectures. These are called the exoteric work as opposed to esoteric. We can fault him for supporting slavery. He felt that every class had its appropriate place, and if slaves got uppity, they were out of their place, and that was a bad thing. In terms of women's not being a friend of women's rights, well, let's say that was can be conditioned by the fact that he was very kind and considerate of his own wives and revered his mother. So basically, we need to be a good person, and everything else will follow. And this will follow by habit. Moral virtues must become habit, as ethos takes its name from ethos in ethics comes from ethos, which means habitual character and disposition. So the more you do something, the more you become it. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And also model yourself on people you admire. The golden mean is between excess and deficiency, which we can see all around us. If we are worried, we may have valid worries, but they can be conditioned by saying, telling yourself not to worry too much, perhaps, which is not always effective, but can be a goal to aim for. He certainly doesn't offer it as like the way some chants do. I know the Buddhist chant, Nam Kyoho Renge Kyo, is supposed to diminish all your anxiety. And there are many techniques and philosophies that mitigate anxiety. But his was based on reason. Virtues are our guide. But he doesn't say reason will conquer everything. Someone like Epictetus would say, hey, you want to break my arm? He said that to his jailer. Go ahead, yank a little harder. I don't care. No, he thought that the physical world, the current world, was really important. And if you're going to be happy, it includes your physical circumstances. One example is Priam from as told in the Iliad, who lost everything. And Edith Hall in her book talks about a woman who lost everything in a cyclone in India or in another country, and who overcame it mentally and was able to lead a happy life. Determined recollection is something I use every day. I have a digital photo frame. Do you have that? Do you have a photo album? Remembering the things that make you happy. Do you have artwork in your home? All of these things, by focusing on them, whether physically present or not, will improve your happiness. It's available to us on account of reason, not available to other animals. Virtues help us lead the contemplative life, which he felt is the best life, and leads to a blessed life, which is ultimate contentment and happiness. Only available to philosophers, and recollection is the highest form of peaceful recollection is the most highest form of human understanding. Not available through religion or art, according to him. So I think that this can be used to lead a eudaimonic life, to try to live up to our potential on all respects, including the political, not in Aristotle's narrow view of politics, which was a typical aristocratic view of his time, but in a more modern democratic view of leading a happy life with our neighbors and having society that cares for others. And all of this can lead to personal happiness. And if our lives are broadly more pleasing and of higher aspiration, using reason, we will be closer to eudaimonia and happier people. And that's more or less what I have to say. And these are some resources which I hope to put on the internet. And thank you so much for listening. The meeting in which we'll cover all this and have a discussion will be later tonight. Thanks again. Appreciate your listening.